Aka? Aka. Wewe mwenye amekuwa hapo gate. Watu wako hapa 18.
Wapi? Kwa? Haijaanza sio ndio? Bado. Unaenda maana nakwambia sign if you are the host to start the meeting. Ukisign hapo unajua.
Semona nini ya YouTube?
Kwa unaendanga YouTube ndio?
Jamu baru pembana baru.
Yote zote. Nani wanaingia kaniletea hapa? Uliona?
Wewe. Kutoka hapo.
Yote is typing. Oh, umetuma? Ndio. Yote ndio kama.
Wewe. Wewe mzee wa jaba. Mzee wa jaba.
Angalia tu nikitaka kuingia. Shida sitaki ninunue data tu. Unajua tu haitafanya.
Okay, we having a card today. Students. We having a card today. Prepare.
Yes.
Tuko na kati.
Mwanafunzi anaongea. Hawajanipa microphone. Umesikia? Mwanafunzi anaongea.
Hi guys.
Okay, everybody keep quiet.
Umeweka chaja?
Hello baba.
Chini hapo tu hapo naomba.
Ndio.
So students, welcome to our lesson of today. Our lesson today is on reading skills. We are going to engage in a discussion of what it means to read. And as we do this, I also want to do a kind of a brief recap of what we have been able to do in the past few days. In the past few days, we have been able to look at the fundamentals of communication. We have looked at the fundamentals of communication, where we engaged in a kind of a definition of what communication is, what scholars have established about the process itself, especially the elements that ensure that the communication process happens. Because communication is not always automatic. There are certain elements that must be present for the process to be said to be complete. And also, we talked about barriers, anything that interferes with that process. Students, I want you to note that when we look at barriers, it is not just necessarily with the intention to identify them, but it is with the intention also of being able to mitigate them. So that when we identify a barrier like a cultural barrier, what we mean is that in the event that you have to share information with people from another culture, it's important to understand what they consider, what they hold important in terms of their beliefs and practices, so that you can be able to conform to them. And when you do that, then there's a possibility that you will be able to understand each other. We also looked at types of communication, where we looked at the written, the spoken, the non-verbal communication, and we also looked at the institutional communication that involved a number of documents, beginning with the letter of our job application, the CV. We looked at the internal memo, and I said that we have other documents which I have enumerated in my notes, which include the letter of inquiry, and they include things like the report and minute writing. Then we moved on to listening skills, and I said that we need to develop effective listening because a great majority of our time as students in Kibabi will be taken up by us sitting before a lecturer or sitting before colleagues and being able to listen. And so, although we have been listening all our lives, there is a possibility that our listening may require to be improved in order to ensure that what we are listening to is taken up and some kind of thought is put into the process of listening. We then went on to look at speaking skills. Under speaking skills, we were able to identify speech delivery methods. That is the impromptu, the manuscript, the memorized, and the extemporaneous speech types. And we said that each of these speech types has its own advantages as well as challenges. However, each one of them has a specific place where they find meaning, because you cannot be invited to give a presentation and you're given, let us say, a week to prepare, and then you go there and do an impromptu speech. That will not be fair to your listeners, because by giving you the opportunity to prepare, they are saying they require relevant information that has been researched and packaged properly to enable your listeners to benefit. So each one of those speech types has its own advantages and challenges, in as far as where they can be used and the time in which they can be used. Then we looked at an effective speaker. We began by saying that we have listened to many speakers in our lives, and there are those that we can identify, isolate, and say this is a good speaker, and there are others we can say were actually poor speakers. And we enumerated a number of characteristics that define and separate an effective speaker or a good speaker from one whom we would consider a poor speaker. So this is with the interest of helping us to become good speakers. So we need to take into consideration those characteristics so that we can then improve our speaking, because at one time or another in our professional life or in our academic life, we'll be required to make a speech. We'll be required to make a presentation orally. And then it means that we need to take into consideration these particular aspects. And then we went on to look at study skills, and we said that as a university student, you are expected to be in charge of your own academic pursuits and therefore your own study habits. And we began by looking at elements of the study program, and this include a timetable, a study timetable. It will include a study environment. It will include activities that you will engage in the process of studying. It will include even the purchase and the budgeting of study materials so that you can then be able to sit down and engage in studying. And alongside those skills, we also looked at note-taking. And I think note-taking was part of what we looked at in listening skills, because the intention is to say that when we are listening, we should also be able to take notes. And I gave you an idea of how to take notes in a physical lecture. Of course, in an online lecture, the aspect of note-taking may be interfered with because you need to listen and to be very focused on the lecture. So perhaps what needs to happen is that you will make notes on the online when you're having online lessons. So today I want us to look at reading skills. Now, reading is one of the activities that you will be expected to engage in as you take charge of your own studying. Again, reading, some scholars have said, and one of them is Addison, he says that reading is to the mind what exercise is to the body. When we consider exercise as being important for the body because it helps the body to keep fit, then reading does the same to the mind. That means that reading is basically a very important activity, and anyone considering himself a scholar or herself a scholar must be able to engage in reading. Now, in this lesson, we'll be able to define what reading is. We'll look at a number of definitions. As always, they are not exhaustive, but they give us an idea of what reading is. We'll look at purposes of reading, or why should we read. We'll look at types of reading with a focus on those ones that I have put there. Then we'll also look at what would be considered poor reading habits and how to improve them. Then we'll look at some strategies that scholars have identified that are useful for enabling you to be able to read effectively and be able to understand. And lastly, we'll look at reading and interpreting non-linear texts. Now, students, what is reading? Reading is a process of interpreting, analyzing, and understanding written information. It is actually an active, it's an active process involving interpretation and thinking as you go along. So most importantly here, student, I want you to note the idea that reading is a process that involves interpreting, analyzing, and understanding So if you're reading, then you are interpreting the written symbols, then you are trying to analyze, to make meaning out of them. And you remember when we were looking at our definition of studying, we said that while studying begins from the point of reading, reading is not necessarily studying, because reading it falls short of studying. However, when we are reading, we are making sense of written symbols. We're trying to analyze the information, and then we're trying to understand the message that is being shared with us. And I want to say it is an active process. Active in the sense that some kind of work is supposed to be undertaken, and this work we'll be able to see it as we go along. So when you're reading, you are not just making sense of written symbols. You're also trying to understand what meaning is being brought out, and therefore it makes it an active process. Reading involves decoding or interpreting written symbols, and these written symbols could be in a textbook, they could be on a phone, they could be in an online platform, in a journal, but they are written symbols, and these are what you decode in the process of reading. Another person has said that reading is a physical and mental activity that requires attention and thought. This is a very important statement, because when we're reading, our mind is very involved. Anytime you find yourself saying, I am reading, and your mind is elsewhere, or many things are passing through your mind, then what that means is that you are not fully engaged in reading, because reading is a physical and mental activity, and it requires attention and thought. It also is an interaction of language in the text and the background knowledge of the reader. So anytime you're reading, you're not just reading something strange and new. You are reading information and interacting with it. Yes. Oh, I'm in class. So reading is a process where you are interacting with the language in which the text is written, and also your background knowledge. So usually you come to the reading process not as a blank mind. You come with some level of understanding, some level of knowledge, some level of information. And this information will inform how you connect what you're reading with what you already know. Well, students, what are the purposes of reading? We read for a number of purposes. We read for entertainment and leisure. This is one of the reasons why we read. There are a number of people who will take up a book, take up a journal, take up an online journal or an online piece of information and read it for pleasure. There is no much stress about what you're reading. You're simply reading to get to understand and to just enjoy yourself. So reading can be for pleasure. Reading can also be for acquiring information and knowledge. And this is something we do a lot. We sometimes require information regarding, let us say, the operation of a machine, the operation of a gadget. We need information about, let us say, directions for when you want to get to a place. For example, your smartphone, because I know most of you have your smartphone. When you got it for the first time, there was a manual that gave you information about the use of your smartphone, how to set it up and how to use it. And in the event there is any challenge, you are also given information and instructions and directions on what to do. So we read for information, and we do that quite a lot. We also read for just knowledge, just to be knowledgeable. Usually when, as a student, for example, you will read some information that is not specifically aligned to your area of specialization. But that knowledge will inform who you are and what you are able to talk about. And many times you'll come to realize that people have a high esteem for people who are in the university, because they believe that at the university level, you are able to interact with a lot of knowledge, a lot of information. And so when they come to you or when they're talking to you, they expect you to be able to show your learning, to show your knowledge. And this knowledge can only be acquired through reading. So, for example, a lawyer. Lawyers are called learned friends. And they're learned friends because they do a lot of reading. A lot of reading is part of what a lawyer is trained to do and what they're taken through in the process of their training. So when they end up with a lot of knowledge, they're able to quote and to cite and to connect information, is because they do a lot of reading. So they read for knowledge. And then finally, the final purpose why we read for academic purposes. And that is where you as a student will fall. You read to gain an overall understanding of main ideas presented in a text. Usually you'll be sent to read a text by your lecturers. Your lecturers will point you out to a text or to a chapter, or they will give you some handout which you are expected to read and to pick out main ideas. Sometimes you'll be expected to read to get specific information from a text. Sometimes you may also read because you want to recall information, perhaps for the sake of examinations, or for the sake of making a presentation in class. So you are reading this information with the intention that you should be able to recall it. That is reading for academic purposes. And lastly, we read for academic purposes so that we are able to evaluate, critique, and analyze material. Usually, a lot of what we come across in our studies is information which we need to evaluate. We don't just take it at face value. But you see, you cannot evaluate what you have not read. You cannot evaluate what you have not understood. So you need to read and understand before you're able to evaluate or critique or analyze the material. Now, students, scholars have come up with a number of strategies which they have isolated as strategies that are useful for reading. And we'll go through each one of them, trying to see what they entail. We have skimming, we have scanning, we have prediction, we have surveying, we have reading for detail, and we have summarizing. These are strategies which I am sure you have come across in the process of your learning, but which I want again to remind you, because when you begin to do serious reading at the university, and which you should have begun to do, then you realize that these strategies will come in handy. They will be useful for making your work easy. So we'll begin with scanning. Scanning is a technique where you read while seeking for certain information, certain specific information. It could be a name, it could be a definition, it could be a year, it could be a town. And so when you're reading, basically you're looking for this information. That means you will move your eyes quickly over the page, and your intention is to spot that particular piece of information that you want. If it is a name of a person, if it is a year, it is a town, or perhaps a definition. So scanning is rapid reading. You don't take in the details, you're simply looking for information. And this can be done quite fast, and it can be done together with other strategies of reading. We then have skimming. Skimming is also another technique where, again, you read quickly, but this time you are reading with the intention to get the main idea or the general information that is handled by a specific text. In scanning, we were looking for specific information. In skimming, we are looking to find out what is the text all about, what is it handling? And to get this grasp of the ideas, then you may want to try and look at a number of things when you are skimming. So first, you look at the introductory paragraphs. Usually, introductory paragraphs will give you the main theme, the general direction in which a text is focusing on. You look at the concluding paragraph, because this one provides a summary of what the text or the chapter is all about. You can skim a book, you can skim a chapter, you can skim a piece of information, but we're basically saying look for the introduction and look for the conclusion, because the introduction will give you the general direction in which the text is focusing on, and the conclusion will give you a summary. It will capture all the information that has been discussed in the body of the text or the document. Then we have the transitional paragraphs. The transitional paragraphs are the paragraphs in between introduction and conclusion. And usually, each transition paragraph has what we call a topic sentence. This topic sentence will capture the information that is specific to that paragraph. So when you look at the first sentence of each of the paragraphs, you'll be skimming. You'll be getting a general idea of what the text is all about. Some texts will have subheadings, some titles. So look at those subtitles. Again, what you're trying to actually get into your mind is this text relevant? Is it of interest to me? Look at the italicized, underlined, and bold-faced items. So you can use this technique when you're trying to decide if a book is useful or right for your studies. For example, you've gone to the library. Our library has a number of books in thousands. So you may, perhaps you do not have a very good idea of how to locate a book, but you have come across this book that looks interesting. So you need to skim it to be able to establish whether it is what you want to read. And usually you look at the table of contents, you look at the cover page, you look at the back page where we have what we call the blurb. That is the information that has to do with the author, information that summarizes the text, trying to understand what the textbook is all about. Remember, when you're skimming, you have not yet begun to read the text. That's why you're just going through it very fast. Now, the next one are extensive and intensive reading. These are two techniques that are quite almost related. When we talk about extensive reading, we're talking about reading a number of texts that have an area of interest or that are related in terms of the subject. So when you, let us say you want to understand about listening skills and you get 2 or 3 textbooks that have handled the topic listening skills, what you're doing is you're doing extensive reading. You are reading to collect information that has been given by various authors, because every author has a way in which they approach information. And this is useful because it helps you now to consolidate all their ideas into one singular understanding. So you can read journals, you can read novels, magazines, periodicals, texts by different authors. And all that information put together gives you a good kind of understanding of a particular topic or a particular text. Then we have intensive reading. This is concentrated, thorough, and comprehensive reading. It is like the kind of reading we do when we are reading literature textbooks, where we go through the text with an analytical mind. We're trying to see who are the characters. We want to understand these characters using their character traits. We are reading to understand the context. the setting of the story. We're trying to look at the conflicts. We do a thorough reading, thorough comprehensive reading, where we
Excuse
focus
me,
on
Doc.
small aspects of the text. So yes.
Hello. Oh, you can zoom
Yes.
out a bit. You can zoom out a bit. Some members that are on their mobile phone, they are not getting it clearly. Try to zoom out. So I think
Something like that.
That one is okay now. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm saying that in intensive reading, we are looking at the nitty-gritties of a text with the intention of being able to do an analysis and interpretation. So intensive is different from extensive. In the extensive, we have a number of texts, and we're looking at the same topic in this number of texts. In the intensive, we are focusing on one text, but we are doing an in-depth analysis. And so you realize that we will apply these types of reading to different textbooks, or we can even combine. For example, we can have a combination of scanning, skimming, and extensive, a combination of scanning, skimming, and intensive. Then we have what we call surveying. Surveying is also a kind of way in which we read. And in surveying, this is how it works. Before you read, you survey the chapter. It is just like skimming. You read the titles, subtitles. You read the pictures. You look at the pictures, the charts, the maps that could be in a text. You look at the questions or any other material or information that is provided in that text. You look at the introductory and concluding paragraphs, and then chapter summary. And this is done intentionally because you want to establish, again, is this a kind of text that I want to read or not? So we can engage in survey. Survey and skimming are quite close in the way they are handled. Then we have prediction or inferring or inferences or making inferences. And this is a kind of reading where the reader is focused on establishing some information regarding the text. An inference is a conclusion that a reader makes while reading or after reading. So, what do I know about this topic? Then, what am I learning from this topic? That ends up being what I infer from the topic. So you could have some knowledge about, let us say, reading. So what do you already know about reading? And what are you going to get from this text that is talking about reading? So whatever you get at the end is what you call prediction or inference. So when we are reading texts, that's why reading becomes an active process. Because when you're reading, your mind is also trying to connect what you know and what you are getting, so that in the end, you are able, therefore, to come up with a kind of conclusion that gives you a good understanding of the issue under discussion in the text. Reading by prediction or inferring. Then finally, we have what we call reading for details. This is reading for comprehension, where you're reading because you seek to get an understanding of information. And when you're doing this, we're told some tips. There are times when you have to read a text more than once because you want to understand it. I'm sure if you can recall how you used to read your comprehension passages, your teacher advised you to read the passage more than once. And the reason is you are reading because you want to comprehend, you're reading because you want to get the details about what is inside that particular text. So you read slowly and carefully, taking notes as you go along. And this is part of what you are expected to be doing, reading for details, reading for details. Now, students, I want us to look at what we call poor reading habits, because not everything that we do in the process of reading is a good habit. We have what we call poor reading habits, and these habits emerge from how we were trained, let us say, at our early stages of learning, at the nursery school or the pre-primary school, or the PP classes now. We have pre-primary classes now. That is where some of these habits may have been founded, and therefore we need to come out of them if we have to make good, effective reading. So the first habit is what we call vocalization. This is where the reader produces sounds as they read. And just the way I've said, this is something that emerges from your primary school foundation. You remember those days when you'd go to class and one of you would be saying capital A and the rest of you would follow and say capital A, small a, and others would say small a. So that kind of reading, when you have it has become part of you. Even when it comes to reading a textbook, you still want to hear the sound in your ears as you read. However, this has challenges. It is a poor reading habit because not that you're going to be making noise for other people, but because it actually slows you down in terms of your reading, because you want to hear. So because you want to hear, it will take you a long time going through a similar text with someone else who was reading silently. So making sounds while reading is a poor reading habit. We have what we call sub-vocalization. And sub-vocalization is where the reader does not produce any sounds, but their vocal cords are moving. That means the person is making sounds internally. Some sound is being made internally. It's only the person who knows that they are making sounds. And if you want to know whether you are actually in this category of those who read by sub-vocalization, you only need to touch your vocal cords when you're reading. And if your vocal cords are moving up and down, if they are vibrating, then you are part of those people who sub-vocalize. So no sound is heard. This reader will not disturb their neighbor. This reader will not make any sound, but they are making the sound internally. So similarly to the person who vocalizes, the speed of the sub-vocalizer will also be limited. That means you'll be slowed down in terms of reading, because again, you have to hear with your ears. You are hearing internally, you are hearing what you're saying, so your speed will be limited. Then we have what we call finger reading, and this involves pointing at words as you go along. I'm sure you have seen those people who trace every line with their finger, and as they do so, again, they are becoming slower, because the rate at which your finger moves is slower than the rate in which your mind is able to internalize, make meaning of the words. Your brain is faster. But when you continuously point at the words, what will happen is that your mind begins to conform to that practice and it becomes slower. So it begins to go along with the words that you're pointing. There is another practice where readers use their head instead of the finger, so that their head is moving from one side of the page to the other. If you're looking at them from a distance, you can see their head moving to the left and then to the right and to the left and then to the right, like that, to show that they are moving along the sentences. Again, because of the finger pointing and the head movement, your reading speed becomes slow. Then there is the narrow recognition span. This is where you read word by word. You read fewer words. That means your eyes can see fewer words, or your eyes are trained to capture few words and to think about those words. And therefore, connecting the information in a sentence is affected. Again, this means that you end up slow. You end up reading for a long time a passage or a text which you would have read quite fast and for a very short duration of time. And then there are those who have poor rhythmic eye movements. Their eyes move either too fast, so that when the eyes are moving like that, they are more keen about the eye movement rather than the meaning they're trying to make from what they're seeing. And this, again, will affect the kind of comprehension they will get of the information they are reading. And lastly, we have regression or backtracking, where you read a sentence or you read a paragraph or you read a chapter, but at the end of it all, you realize that you have not understood and you want to read again. So let us say you read a sentence. By the end of the sentence, you don't know what you have read, so you begin to read the sentence again. Or you read a paragraph. At the end of the paragraph, you don't know what you have captured, so you go back to reading. This backtracking is an indication that your mind is not focused on what you're reading. It is a process that will also slow you down, because if you have to backtrack on every paragraph, you have to backtrack on every sentence, then it means it will take you longer to read and to understand. Now, students, I said that every time we come across such things like poor habits, what we need to understand is that we are identifying them so that we can be able to work on them and reduce them. So how do we reduce subvocalization and vocalization? For example, we have to make a very conscious action, a very conscious decision to not produce sound, not inside or outside, not to point the finger, not to use the head. We have to make a very conscious practice, a very conscious decision. You have to take time, having realized that you usually subvocalize, take time to tell yourself, now I'm beginning to read and I should not be producing any sound. I should not be making any internal sounds. And in the process, you, with time and with practice, because this is something that you are supposed to have done by lower primary. So if at the university it is still evident, then it means that you'll have to make very serious steps, take very serious steps towards changing your habit. When it comes to regression, you have to ensure that your mind is focused, that there are no issues disturbing you. You are in a place where you can be able to read without any interference. You're in a place where you can focus on the material that is in front of you, that you are in good health, that you have slept well, that you have eaten well, so that you are not disturbed. Your mind is only focused on what you're reading. So it is important, student, that you, each one of you, examines their reading abilities, their reading habits. How do you read? You can, there are many places where on the internet where they give you reading exercises, reading speeds, reading exercises that can help you improve on your reading speed. And I want to tell you that good reading speed is important to help you grasp information. Your mind is tailored to be able to move quite fast with the information it receives. When you give it very little information, you make it lazy, and in a kind of a way, you are not able to connect what you are reading with what you already know. So give yourself the ability, the strength, and seek to be able to improve your speed. You can also make use of dictionaries that will help you understand words, because sometimes people regress because they want to understand the meaning of a word. Improve your vocabulary and knowledge, and keep reading. Reading, because they say practice makes perfect. Continuously read, and read when you are very sensitive about how you're going about the process of reading. Now, it is important for us to be able to improve how we read. I have spoken a bit about that, but let us still look at some tips on how you can improve your reading. One, we're saying read as often as possible. Again, we're saying practice makes perfect. If you want to know a good reader, you will know them because they have engaged in a lot of reading. They are comfortable when reading. They are able to make sense of what they are reading, and they do this very purposefully. So the less you read, the less effective you are in terms of even understanding the material you have. That is why it is important as a student that you don't just rely on the notes you receive in the lecture room. You don't just rely on the information your lecturer gives you. Find time, go to the library. We're going to be looking at library skills very soon, but go to the library. There are very many texts on every subject under the earth in our Kibabi University library. So go there, read textbooks that are specific to your subject area. You can even read widely, read even materials that are not in your area of specialization. Read things that are of interest to you. Read, read, and read. When you do that, you'll begin to realize that your mind is going to be engaged. It is going to be, you'll have exercised your abilities to grasp information, and you'll be very knowledgeable in terms of many things under the sun. So take time and read as often as possible. Read things that interest you. Read even the newspapers, read storybooks. Some of you are actually very good storybook readers or novel readers. But since you came to the university, you thought you must give up that and only take up textbooks that have to do with biology, textbooks that have to do with physics, big textbooks that have to do with geography. That is very good, but also read things that interest you, because you're trying to cultivate within you the ability to read and the interest to read. Engaging with written information is not an easy thing. You have to cultivate it. You have to practice and practice. And then number 3, practice scanning for specific information. There are times when you may want to just look for specific information, even in a big text. So practice that. It will also help you to improve. Number 4, expand your vocabulary. Usually, vocabulary becomes an issue, especially when you are reading and you come across a word that is new to you, a technical word, and you do not understand it. What will happen is that you may want to stop and look for a dictionary or try to get the meaning. But the truth is, if you had continued reading, you may be able to predict, you may be able to infer the meaning of that particular word from the preceding sentences and the other sentences that come after that. So when you look at a word, you realize you do not understand it, continue reading. You will actually get an understanding by connecting the word and the information that follows after that. And number 5, we're saying improve your reading speed. I've already said that on the net, if you key in reading speed, how to improve reading speed, there are very many useful ideas, even YouTube videos that will help you to improve your reading speed. And I've said that reading speed is key to your understanding. The slower you read, the more time you will take to understand information. Sometimes people think that when you read slowly is when you're getting the information. But scholars have established that if you read fast, then you give your brain that the ability to connect information very quickly. So improve your reading speed. This will help you take less time on a text. It will help you get the most out of a text. It will also help you to connect the information and therefore benefit from what you are reading. Number 6, check your comprehension. You have been looking at a text, you have been working with a text or some written material. Find out whether you have understood. How do you find out? Usually in questions, through setting up questions, through a test, through applying the information in some assignment. Test how well you have comprehended the information you have read. If you are reading together in a group, then it will be important for you to have some kind of oral questions. What have we been reading? Then we bring out what we have been reading. That will help you be able to establish whether you have understood or not. Because when you're reading, the intention is to understand and also to recall. So are you able to understand? Are you able to recall? Are you even able to apply? And lastly, always make brief notes. To improve your reading, make brief notes. As you read, you have subtopics, you have subtitles, you have points that have been enumerated by the writer. Ensure that you're making notes. Brief notes will be for actually future reference, but also they help you to focus. Because when you're making notes, you have to be very keen about what you're writing. You have to be very keen about the point. You have to pick it from a lot of information. Actually, from a forest of information. You have to pick a specific point and put it down. So making brief notes is important. Do not read a text the way you would read a newspaper. Do not read, let us say, you have been asked by your lecturer to look for some information in a certain journal or a certain textbook. Do not read it the way you read a storybook. This time, read and take notes. When you do that, you realize that you'll be able to capture information, you'll be able to remember, and you'll also be able to be a focused reader. Now, students, scholars have also come up with some techniques which they have established to be very good in terms of assisting a reader to make sense of what they are reading. A reader to make sense of what they are reading. And the first technique is the SQ3R method, where S stands for survey, Q stands for question. The first R is read, the second R is to recite, and the third R is to review. It is a good method of remembering what you have read. So the first thing you need to do once you get your text, or is it a book? Survey. That is, read through the way we said we survey, we read the titles, subtitles. We're trying to gather information about the text. And usually when you're reading a textbook, at the level of surveying, you're also thinking of what is the text about and what questions can I be able to create. The second step is questions. Here you come up with questions that are related to the text. How do you form questions? We don't form questions like the examination questions. We are guided by the topics or subtopics. Let us say you have a textbook on HIV in Kenya, HIV prevalence in Kenya. So the kind of questions you'd want to set up is, what is HIV? Where is HIV most prevalent in Kenya? Why is it prevalent? Among which gender is it prevalent? Do we have reasons for it being prevalent? So you come up with questions that will guide your reading. So while you are surveying, you are also trying to establish what are the subtitles inside this text, or inside this chapter, or inside this handout? What is the information that is set for me? So because when you're surveying, you do it very fast. You simply go through without looking at the details. That will help you be able to come up with questions. Again, when you're coming up with questions, you don't come up with a lot of questions, because these questions are simply going to guide your reading. They help your mind to be able to look at the information. Number 3, the first R is to read. This is the general reading we have been talking about, reading and making notes. So let us say you have a chapter, read it. Do the general reading we're talking about without the poor reading habits, and make notes. Then number 4, where you are reciting. To recite will involve you closing your textbook and then trying to remember what you have read, guided by the questions you set under number 2. So you may want to answer those questions. So for example, we're reading about HIV/AIDS prevalence in Kenya. So the first question was, what is AIDS? So with our book closed, we are going to recite. We're going to, from off our heads, we're going to answer that question. And we'll answer all the questions that we had set under number 2. In the process, let us say we realize that there is one question we are not able to answer. Then that becomes our part 5. We will review. We'll now open our textbook, and then using the scanning reading method, we will quickly begin to look for the information by scanning. So we're trying to look for the answers to that question which we did not get the answer. Then we'll be reviewing. So the SQ3R method has been established to be useful for students because number 1, it helps you to be very focused. It helps you to focus on what you are reading. It also helps you to be able to engage. You're trying to ask yourself some questions and then looking for answers. Then number 3, it helps you to end up with some notes about what you are reading. So in the process, you don't just read, but you also end up with notes. And number 4, it will help you to fill in the gaps of any information you may not have grasped properly at the level of reviewing. So it is a method that has been established as being useful for helping you to remember what you have read. Now, the SQ3R was an earlier method. Later on, some scholars went on to say, no, we can have a 4th R. And they're saying, you will survey, you will question, you will read, and you also can go on to record. Some scholars look at it as record, others look at it as reflect. When you reflect, you are simply trying to connect what you have read with what you already knew, so that now you're consolidating your knowledge. Now, students, these 2 processes, or these 2 techniques, the SQ3R and the SQ4R processes, have been found to be useful. And I suggest that you try them. Anytime you're reading a text, begin by surveying. Begin by going quickly through the text to establish what it is all about, to look at the subtitles, and to look at what general information is captured in that text. Then number 2, come up with questions. A number of questions, they could be 3 or 4, depending on the length of the written material that will guide your reading. Then number 3, begin to read. Normally, as you read, you are taking notes. And then close your book and try to answer the questions that you had through the process called reciting. In the event that you do not remember everything, then now you can go back to reading, and that will be called reviewing. Finally, you can then reflect on the information you have just read with the intention of connecting what you have understood or what you have been reading. Perhaps you want to understand because of an assignment, you want to understand because of a classroom presentation, you want to understand because you are preparing for an exam. So even when you're preparing for an exam, you can still go through this same process and you will be able to grasp the information and be able to remember. SQ3R and SQ4R are useful techniques that help you to focus so that you're not just reading anyhow. Now, students, I know that most of what you have been reading has been information that is presented in a linear manner. When we talk about linear, it could be information that has been presented in paragraph form or in the form of sentences, in the form of in the form of an essay. So sometimes, as you continue doing your academic pursuits and your reading, you'll come across authors or writers who will present information in non-linear manners. For example, they will present information in the form of a graph, a table, or in the form of, let us say, a pie chart. That is different from what we know, where information is presented in paragraph form. Now, this is what I want you to understand, that some writers because these diagrammatic displays are able to summarize information effectively. One table can contain information which would have filled pages upon pages in terms of continuous writing. But this is captured in one particular table. Again, these diagrammatic displays are useful because they help display or demonstrate relationships between variables. Variables would be those aspects that change about a thing. And sometimes when you want to show how they are related, it is done very well in the form of diagrammatic displays. Sometimes we want to know how things have proceeded, the trends. These trends are brought out very well in a graph or in a map. Graphs and maps present or communicate information at a glance. You only need to look at a map, a chart, and you're able to see a lot of information at one go. Instead of reading pages upon pages, you can just look at one graph and it will give you all the information. And again, because they are diagrammatic, they are easy to remember. We remember more of what we see with our eyes than what we read. So sometimes when we combine the written and the diagrammatic displays, then information is well understood. Now, to help you interpret these diagrams, usually the writers or the authors will provide you with a title. They will provide you with a scale, or what we call a key. This key will give you a direction on how information has been calibrated in the diagram. Sometimes if the diagram is not originally theirs, then they will acknowledge this. And they will also usually provide some kind of shading and numbering of the diagrams to help you to be able to follow easily. Now, student, as we come to the end of this topic, I want to say this, that you need to be an active reader. That when you are reading, you don't tell people, now I am reading, so keep quiet, and you are just there looking at the written symbols. When you're reading, you need to read actively. And how do you do this? You read actively by using the strategies that we have just mentioned. You read actively by writing brief notes. Number 2, read purposefully. Understand what is the purpose why you are reading. Because when you read for pleasure, it will be different from the way you read for examination, or the way you read for details, or the way you read for scanning or skimming. So understand the purpose why you're reading. Why are you reading? Are you reading to get general information? Are you reading to entertain yourself? Why are you reading? Understand the purpose for your reading. And lastly, it's important that you be engaged and critical. Don't just read every information and take it in without questioning. You have now become a scholar, and scholars will usually try to understand the kind of information that is presented to them. They will try to connect it with what they already know and what they are getting. And that is scholarship. So be an ape reader, active, purposeful, and engaged. That will help you become effective as a reader. So, as we end our lesson, I want to say that for a university student, there is great expectation that you will go out of your way to read. And no one will follow you to establish whether you have read or not. But I want to assure you that your reading will be very evident in the kind of knowledge you have, the kind of information you are able to articulate, the way you answer your examinations. Those will reveal your reading. Show me a student who is doing well in the examinations, and I will show you a student who reads. Most of the exams that you will get in this level of learning will be questions that require you to be able to apply. There will be questions that will require you to be able to synthesize information. There will be questions that will require you to be able to bring in a connection between what you know and what you have read. So it is important that you go out of your way. I have said no one will chase you around. No one will even ask you whether you have read or you have not. But what will happen is that your results will show the person who has read and the person who has not. And even for those who are reading, it is important that you engage with what you are reading. Because again, just reading for reading's sake will not benefit your academics. So it is important that as you read, you are engaging with your reading, you're writing your brief notes, you are asking yourself questions about what you have read, you are applying what you have read to questions. And that's why when we are doing study skills, we said one of the activities during your study process is to look at past papers. So apply what you're reading to the questions that you have found in the past papers. Do not just read and imagine that the information will stay there. It will be pushed to your long-term memory. And it's only by applying it that you bring it to the fore of your memory. So apply what you're reading. Anytime you have been asked to go out and read, please do that. And even if you're not asked, I said that your class, your lecturers will usually give you a course outline at the beginning of your semester. If they have not done that, ask the class rep to kindly inquire from the class, from the lecturer, to give you or to share with you the course outline. At the very bottom of the course outline, we have what we call a reading list. Now, the reading list is intended to help you when you go to the library. Among the many thousands of books, you can be able to pick a specific book that has been pinpointed by your lecturer. Pick that book and be able to get information that is related to your course. Perhaps as many of the topics that are going to be covered inside it. So your course outline, the reading list, should be able to help you. If you have exhausted those channels, or just even alongside those channels, you can also go to the Google. You have internet available in Kibabi University. It is important that you make use of it. You only need to key in a title from any of your course outlines or any of the topics that are going to be covered in your course outline, and a lot of information will come up. You'll find YouTube videos, you'll find textbooks, you'll find information that people have shared in regard to the topic of interest. So being an online learner, it is important that you do not make an assumption that there is no content online. Take time and search for that information and use it. So with that, I want to say that our lesson for today is at level. But before we end the lesson, I want to say this. We are still in the process of organizing how your online CAT will be undertaken. The ODEL team is working on the internet issues, and once that is done, we will inform you of when you can undertake the CAT. The CAT will surely be online. It will be on the e-learning platform, that is the LMS, where all of you are enrolled. So meanwhile, as you prepare for that CAT, I would want to encourage you again to keep your presence on the online platform very visible. Read your notes, go and listen to the YouTube videos, sit together with others in the group discussions and discuss the topics that we have handled this far. Try to get an understanding, look for past papers in our library, and undertake to understand how questions are done in this area of KUC 111. So the exam is not today, it may not be next week, but you'll be informed when it will be. Your class representatives, and even on the e-learning platform, I'll be able to put that information on our announcements so that you will be able to see it and get prepared. Remember, when the exam is on the online platform, it will be open for a specific period of time. All of you will need to log in and undertake the exam at once or at a go. So within that period, when the exam is, the timelines for the exams, when they elapse, then the system will close and give you your results. So you will be able to see your performance immediately, and anyone who will have undertaken the CAT will be able to see their performance. So ensure that this happens. Once you know when the CAT is, ensure that you are logged on. Otherwise, I want to wish you a good day. We cannot have a takeaway CAT. It will not be a takeaway CAT. It will be an online it will be an online cut. We are working on the system, and once it is ready, you will be informed and you will undertake it. So have a good day, and keep reading your notes, keep revisiting the online platform.